There is a version of you that the world has never met, not because it doesn't exist, but because you've spent years burying it under the weight of other people's expectations, their opinions, their noise, their need to see you react, to see you bend, to see you break. You have been trained, quietly and relentlessly, to respond to the world on its terms, to flinch when poked, to explain when questioned, to perform when watched. And somewhere along the way you forgot that you had a choice, that you always had a choice. The world is not designed for your peace. Let that land for a moment. The systems around you, the notifications, the arguments, the headlines, the social comparisons, the subtle jabs disguised as jokes, none of it is accidental. Chaos is profitable. Your emotional instability keeps you distracted, keeps you consuming, keeps you small. Every time you react without thinking, someone benefits. Every time you spiral into anxiety or rage or the desperate need to be understood, the machine keeps spinning, and you keep feeding it. But what if you stopped? Not dramatically. Not because you're running away from your life or pretending you don't feel things, but quietly, deliberately. What if in the middle of all that noise and pressure and provocation, you simply chose to be still? Not because you've gone numb, not because you've given up, but because you've discovered something that most people never will, that your stillness is your greatest power, that the calm you carry inside is not a weakness to be hidden. It is a weapon to be wielded. And unlike rage or pride or the burning need to prove yourself, this weapon doesn't exhaust you. It sharpens you. This is what the ancient Stoics understood, not as a philosophy locked in dusty books, but as a living, breathing practice, a way of moving through the world that refuses to be enslaved by it. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man on earth, commanding armies, ruling an empire surrounded on all sides by war, betrayal, flattery, and chaos. And yet, every morning, he sat with his journal and reminded himself of the same truth, that the only thing he could ever truly control was what happened inside him, not outside, not other people, not circumstances, just his own mind, just his own response. And in that discipline, in that fierce and daily practice of inner mastery, he found something the world could not touch: freedom. That is what we are here to build, not a performance of calm, not the kind of forced serenity that snaps under pressure and pretends it never happened, but something deeper, something real, a foundation within yourself so solid that when the world tries to shake you, and it will, it always will, you don't crumble, you don't scatter, you hold. Think for a moment about the last time someone provoked you. Maybe it was a cutting remark from someone who knows exactly where your soft spots are. Maybe it was a situation that felt unfair, a moment where everything in you wanted to explode, to fight back, to make sure they knew what they had done. You wanted justice. You wanted acknowledgement. You wanted the world to pause and recognize that you had been wronged. That feeling is human. It is ancient. It is wired into you as deeply as hunger or thirst, and there is nothing shameful about it. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. The moment between what happened to you and what you chose to do next. That moment, however brief it feels, however much it seems to disappear in the flood of emotion, that moment is yours. It has always been yours. And inside that moment lives your entire power as a human being. Not your strength in the gym, not your status in the room, not your words or your reputation, but your ability to pause, to breathe, to choose. Epictetus, who began his life as a slave, a man who had every reason to be consumed by bitterness and helplessness, built an entire philosophy on this single truth, that no one can take from you what you do not give them. Your opinions, your desires, your responses, these are yours. Everything else, what people say, what they do, what happens to you without your consent, that belongs to the world. And you cannot control the world, but you can, through practice and patience and relentless honesty with yourself, learn to govern the only territory that ever truly belonged to you, your inner world. That governance does not come naturally. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. the ability to pause before reacting, to observe your own emotions without being swallowed by them, to remain anchored when everything around you is pulling you toward the current. These are skills, hard-won, daily practice skills, and like any skill, they require failure. They require the humbling experience of losing your composure and then sitting with the wreckage afterward, not in shame, but in honest reflection. Where did I lose myself? What pulled me out? What would I do differently if I could return to that moment? Because that question, asked sincerely and answered honestly, is how the Stoic grows. Not by being perfect, not because using some monk-like detachment from human experience, but by returning, again and again and again, back to the center, back to that still point inside that the noise has not yet reached. There is a certain kind of person you have probably encountered at some point in your life. Maybe you know one personally. Maybe you've watched one from across a room and felt something stir in you that you couldn't quite name. This person moves differently. They don't rise to every taunt. They don't scatter when things get complicated. When someone tries to diminish them, they don't crumble and they don't explode. They simply look, perhaps they smile, and they carry on. And that response, or rather that non-response, leaves the room slightly confused, slightly unsettled, and strangely impressed. That quality is not coldness, it is not arrogance, it is not the practiced indifference of someone who has learned to suppress what they feel. It is something far more sophisticated. It is the presence of a person who knows, at a cellular level, that they do not need to prove themselves in this moment, that their worth is not on the table for negotiation, that their peace is not something others get to vote on, that their identity does not shift based on how this person or this situation chooses to treat them. That is what unnerves people. Not silence for its own sake, but the confidence that lives inside the silence. The unspoken message that says, I see exactly what you're doing, and I am choosing not to play. Not because I am afraid, not because I don't care, but because I have decided that my energy belongs to something more worthy than this. When you begin to practice this, when you truly commit to building the inner architecture that makes this kind of response possible, something starts to happen in your daily life that you did not expect. You begin to see clearly. The fog of constant reaction, of being always on guard, always poised to defend or attack or explain, that fog starts to lift, and what you see underneath it is extraordinary. You see people, real people, not enemies or allies or threats, but frightened, complicated, striving human beings who are mostly just trying to manage their own inner chaos. The coworker who undermines you in meetings is not powerful. They are terrified of being irrelevant. The family member who always has a criticism is not strong. They are holding on for dear life to a version of themselves that needs to feel superior, to feel safe. The stranger online who tears into your work has never built a thing. They are shouting into a void, hoping the echo will feel like connection. When you see this, truly see it, not as an excuse for their behavior, but as an explanation for it. Something softens in you, not into weightness, into wisdom. You stop taking everything personally because you understand that most of what people project outward has nothing to do with you. You are simply the nearest surface onto which they are throwing their unresolved pain, and you can, with compassion and clarity, choose not to absorb it. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not pretending that cruelty doesn't hurt or that injustice doesn't matter. It does, of course it does. But there is a profound difference between acknowledging pain and being defined by it, between recognizing that someone has treated you poorly and spending the next 3 days rehearsing the conversation you wish you had, between feeling anger, which is honest and human and sometimes necessary, and weaponizing that anger against yourself through obsessive rumination and the endless seeking of a justice that may never come. The Stoic does not demand the world be fair. They have long since made their peace with the fact that it is not. What they demand of themselves, fiercely and without compromise, is that they respond to unfairness with dignity, that even when they cannot change what is happening around them, they will choose how they stand inside it. They will choose what they say. They will choose what they give their attention to. They will choose who they become in the aftermath. Because here is the truth that the noise of the world does not want you to discover. You are not your circumstances. You are not the worst thing that has ever been said about you. You are not the sum of your failures or the ceiling of your successes. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do with what happened to you. And that choice, made consistently across thousands of small moments, most of them unglamorous and unwitnessed, that is the architecture of character. That is the slow construction of a self that cannot be rattled, cannot be stolen, cannot be diminished by someone else's need to feel powerful. There is a silence that holds more than words ever could. You have felt it, even if you have never named it. It lives in the pause before you speak, when you know the right answer is to say nothing. It lives in the breath you take before you respond to something that deserves no response. It lives in the moment when someone expects you to crumble, and instead you simply meet their eyes and hold. That silence is not emptiness, it is fullness, it is presence. It is the accumulated discipline of 1,000 moments where you chose to remain yourself, instead of becoming what the moment was pushing you to be. People who rely on noise to feel powerful are genuinely unsettled by this kind of silence, because their entire strategy depends on your reaction. They throw something out and wait for the ping of acknowledgement, whether it comes as anger or defensiveness or the desperate need to explain yourself. That ping tells them their provocation worked. That ping tells them they matter, that they have influence over you, that they can reach you. And when the ping doesn't come, when you sit in that quiet, steady place and simply do not rise, they are left holding something they don't know what to do with. Their own energy returned to them unopened. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. You are not punishing them with silence. You are protecting yourself with it. You are refusing to participate in a dynamic that costs you everything and gives you nothing. And there is no manipulation in that refusal. There is only the honest recognition that some conversations are not conversations at all. They are performances designed to keep you small, and you have decided you are no longer interested in the role. In time, and this is one of the most remarkable gifts of this practice, your silence stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like expression. Because the truth is that a well-timed silence says more than any perfectly crafted argument ever could. It says that you are not afraid of discomfort, that you do not need resolution to feel okay, that you can hold complexity and uncertainty without demanding that someone hand you a neat conclusion, that you trust yourself enough to wait, to observe, to think before you speak, and to sometimes choose not to speak at all. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, words he never intended for public consumption, words that are all the more powerful because they were written only for himself. He wrote about the daily war of the mind, about how easy it is to be swept away by the opinions of others, by the desire for praise, by the fear of shame. He wrote about waking each morning and consciously choosing who he wanted to be that day, not who the empire needed him to be, not who history would one day judge him to be, but who he, in the privacy of his own mind, believed he should be. That kind of integrity, private, unglamorous, practiced without an audience, is the rarest thing in the world, and it is also the most powerful. Because when you build yourself from the inside, when your standards come from your own values rather than from the shifting approval of those around you, you become someone who cannot be controlled, someone whose behavior does not change based on who is watching, someone who is the same in the spotlight as they are in the dark. And that consistency, that wholeness, is what trust is actually built on, not performance, not presentation, but the simple, radical act of being exactly who you are, always, regardless of what it cost you. Now, let us speak plainly about something that nobody wants to admit. Most of us are deeply, sometimes desperately, addicted to external validation. We have built entire identities on the way other people see us. Our career choices, our relationships, our social media presence, our daily decisions, all of it quietly shaped by the question, what will they think? And this is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is the completely understandable result of being a social creature raised in a world that has systematically taught you that your worth is something to be earned, confirmed, and constantly re-demonstrated in front of others. But here's where it becomes a trap. Praise feels like love, and it is addictive in the same way. When someone tells you that you are brilliant, that you are beautiful, that your work is extraordinary, the brain lights up with the same chemicals as a reward. And just like any reward, you begin to chase it. You begin to shape yourself around it. You begin to make decisions not based on what you genuinely believe is right or good or true, but based on what will produce that next hit of recognition. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you stop being yourself. You become a character designed for an audience, and no matter how much applause that character receives, there is a part of you, deep and quiet and increasingly desperate, that knows the applause is not for you. It is for the performance. And the real you, the complex, uncertain, imperfect, genuine you, is somewhere off stage, waiting. The Stoics had a name for this trap. They called it the pursuit of externals. And they considered it one of the greatest threats to human flourishing. Not poverty, not illness, not even death, but the slow surrender of your inner life to the opinions and judgments of others, because when you live for praise, you also die by criticism. The two are inseparable. You cannot open yourself to one without becoming vulnerable to the other. And so you spend your entire life on a pendulum, swinging between the high of being admired and the devastation of being dismissed, never quite landing anywhere solid, never quite feeling at rest. Epictetus understood this from a place most of us will never have to visit. As a slave, he had nothing, no status, no possessions, no freedom of movement. Everything that the world tells you matters, he was denied entirely. And yet he became one of the most psychologically free human beings who ever lived, because he understood, through suffering, through observation, through the sheer necessity of survival, that the only thing anyone can ever truly own is their own mind, their own judgment, their own response to the world. And once you claim that ownership fully and without apology, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing the world to confirm your worth, because you have already confirmed it yourself. This does not mean you become indifferent to others. It does not mean compliments no longer feel good or that criticism no longer stings. You are human. You will feel all of it. But you will feel it the way you feel weather. You notice it, you acknowledge it, and then you continue walking, because your direction was never determined by the forecast. It was determined by something inside you that knew where it was going long before the clouds appeared. Think about the moments in your life when you were most at peace, not the moments of greatest success, not the moments of loudest applause, but the moments of deepest peace. Chances are those moments had something in common. You were not performing. You were not waiting for judgment. You were simply present, doing something that felt aligned with who you genuinely are, without an audience, without a scoreboard, without the anxious background noise of wondering how it would be received. You were just there, fully there, in the quiet dignity of being yourself. That feeling is not a luxury reserved for monks or philosophers or the exceptionally disciplined. It is available to you, right now, today, not as a destination you arrive at after years of perfect practice, but as a choice you make in this moment, and then in the next one, and then in the one after that. The choice to stop measuring your worth against other people's measuring sticks. The choice to stop performing your life for a crowd that is too busy performing their own to actually watch yours. The choice to come home to yourself and stay there, even when the world makes it inconvenient. But let us be honest about how difficult this is, because the gravitational pull of external validation is not subtle. It is woven into almost every system around you. School rewarded you for what others decided was correct. Work rewards you for what your employer decides is valuable. Social media quantifies your worth in likes and shares and follower counts. Even our closest relationships often function as mirrors in which we search for confirmation that we are lovable, worthy, enough. The entire architecture of modern life has been built around the assumption that you need external confirmation to feel internal security. And dismantling that assumption brick by brick is not easy. It is one of the most demanding and most liberating things a human being can do. It starts with noticing, not judging, just noticing. Noticing the moment when you are about to say something, not because it is true, but because you think it will land well. Not because when you are about to make a decision, not because it aligns with your values, but because you are afraid of what someone will think if you choose differently. Not because the approval of a person, any person, has quietly become more important to you than the approval of your own conscience. These moments are not failures. They are data. They are the quiet alarm bells of a self that is trying to find its way back to center. And every time you notice, every time you catch yourself reaching for the validation before you have checked in with your own truth, you have an opportunity, a small, unglamorous, deeply important opportunity to choose differently, to ask yourself, what do I actually think about this? What do I actually want? What would I do here if absolutely no one was watching? And then, with whatever courage that requires, to do that thing. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the most powerful empire in the known world, surrounded by yes men and flatterers and people who would say anything to maintain his favor, returned to this discipline every single day. He wrote reminders to himself not to be seduced by praise, not to let it inflate him, not to let criticism deflate him. He wrote about the danger of performing virtue rather than practicing it, of doing good things for the sake of being seen to do good things, rather than because they were simply good things to do. He understood that the moment you start doing the right thing for applause, you have already begun to drift from the right thing, because the right thing does not care whether anyone is watching. It only asks whether you are. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living for approval. It is not the honest exhaustion of hard work. It is the hollow exhaustion of never quite being yourself, of always being slightly edited, slightly curated, slightly adjusted for whatever audience happens to be present, of carrying around multiple versions of yourself, one for work and one for family and one for strangers and one for social media, and never quite knowing which one is real. That exhaustion is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of misalignment, of a life being lived from the outside in rather than from the inside out. The antidote is not to stop caring about others. The Stoics were not advocating for selfishness or isolation. They cared deeply about community, about duty, about contributing to the world beyond themselves. Marcus Aurelius spent his entire life in service. Epictetus taught students until his dying days. Seneca wrote endlessly, trying to share what he had learned about living well. They were not hermits. They were not cold, but their care for others grew from a rooted sense of self rather than from a desperate need for those others to return the favor in validation and praise. They gave because it was right to give, not because giving made them feel seen. That distinction matters more than you might think, because care that is rooted in your own values is sustainable. It does not collapse when it is not reciprocated. It does not twist into resentment when it is not acknowledged. It does not suddenly become conditional when someone fails to appreciate it. It simply continues, quiet and steady and genuinely selfless, because it never needed anything in return to begin with. And that kind of care, given freely without the hooks of expectation, is the rarest and most powerful form of love that one human being can offer another. Now let us turn to something that lives very close to this, something that operates in the shadow of praise and is far more insidious: the way we speak to ourselves. Because for all the time we spend worrying about what others think of us, most of the real damage is done not by their voices, but by our own. The inner critic who never quite goes quiet, the voice that replays every mistake in excruciating detail, that narrates your failures with a certainty and a cruelty that you would never direct at another human being, that interrupts your moments of joy with a whisper of "you don't deserve this," or "it won't last," or "who do you think you are?" Seneca wrote in one of his letters, We suffer more in imagination than in reality. And nowhere is this truer than in the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. The judgments we have internalized from years of criticism, comparison, and the relentless measuring of our worth against standards we did not choose and cannot meet. These stories are not true. They are not objective assessments of your character or your potential. They are the residue of wounds, the echoes of voices that have long since left the room, but somehow kept running on a loop in your head. The Stoic practice asks you to examine these voices the same way you would examine any other piece of information, with reason, with skepticism, with the honest question, is this actually true? Not does it feel true, but is it actually demonstrably true? Because often you will find that the harshest verdicts your inner critic delivers are not conclusions drawn from evidence. They are fears dressed up as facts. They are old stories that someone else started and you took over the telling of, and you have the power to stop telling them. Not because you intended it to real and the way they into to tell a different one. This is not toxic positivity. It is not the hollow instruction to simply think good thoughts and everything will be fine. It is something far more demanding and far more real. It is the work of honest self-examination, of sitting with yourself without flinching and asking, what do I actually believe about my own worth? Where did that belief come from? Does it serve me? Does it serve the life I am trying to build? And if the answer is no, then what belief, earned through honest reflection and genuine effort, could I choose to build instead? This work is quiet. It is slow. It is deeply personal. It will not trend on social media. No one will applaud you for it. And that is precisely what makes it so powerful, because it is the one kind of work that cannot be performed for an audience. It can only be done in private, in the honest silence of your own company, with no one watching and no one grading you and no external reward waiting at the end. Just you and the truth of who you are and who you are choosing to become. And that, when you sit with it long enough, turns out to be the most important work of a human life, because everything else, your relationships, your career, your creativity, your ability to love and be loved and contribute something real to the world, everything flows from the quality of that inner ground, from whether it is solid or shifting, from whether it is rooted in your own truth or built on the borrowed approval of others, from whether you can stand in it alone, without applause, without confirmation, without anyone telling you that you are enough, and simply know that you are. That knowing is not arrogance. It does not make you better than anyone else. It does not exempt you from failure or criticism or the painful and necessary feedback that genuine growth requires. But it gives you something that no amount of external validation ever can, a place to come back to, a center that holds when everything else is spinning, a self that does not disappear when the praise stops coming or shatter when the criticism begins. And from that place, something remarkable becomes possible. You can receive honest feedback without being destroyed by it. You can be wrong without being worthless. You can fail without being a failure. You can be criticized without being defined by the criticism. You can be praised without being inflated by the praise. Because none of it, the good or the bad, reaches the deepest part of you, the part that simply knows who it is and what it stands for and what it is here to do. The Stoics believed that this inner freedom was the highest achievement of a human life, not wealth, not fame, not even wisdom technically, though wisdom was the path, but this unshakable inner sovereignty, this capacity to be fully present in the world, to engage with it completely, to care about it deeply, and yet to never be entirely at its mercy, to be in the river without being swept away by it, to feel the current without losing your footing, to remain, in the most fundamental sense, yourself. That is what we are building here. Not a mask of calm that hides a churning interior, not because they had not the two, not because in private, but something real, something earned, something that belongs to you in the way that nothing borrowed or given or granted by others ever truly can. And the building begins not with some grand dramatic transformation, but with the next small moment. The next time someone offers you praise and you feel that familiar rush, you pause and ask yourself whether the work was good because they said so, or whether it was good because you know it was. The next time someone criticizes you and you feel that familiar sting, you pause and ask whether there is truth in it worth examining, or whether it is simply noise to be acknowledged and released. The next time you are about to make a decision and you feel the weight of other people's expectations pressing in from all sides, you pause and ask what you would choose if you were the only one who would ever know. Those pauses, small and silent and unspectacular, are where your freedom is built, one moment at a time, one choice at a time, one honest, private, unglamorous act of returning to yourself at a time. And over days and months and years, those moments accumulate. They become a practice. The practice becomes a habit. The habit becomes a character. And the character becomes a life that is genuinely, irreducibly yours, not designed for applause, not shaped by fear, not held together by the fragile thread of other people's good opinion, but rooted, solid, quiet in its confidence, unmoved by the weather of the world, and free, truly free, in the only way that has ever mattered, from the inside out. There is a kind of courage that nobody talks about. It does not look like the courage of the battlefield or the boardroom. It does not announce itself with drama or demand recognition for its sacrifice. It is quieter than that, more private, more difficult in many ways than any outward act of bravery. It is the courage to be honest with yourself, to look at your own life, your own patterns, your own choices, without the comfortable buffer of excuse or the soft mercy of self-deception, and to see what is actually there, not what you wish were there, not what you have told yourself is there, but what is actually, genuinely, undeniably there. Most people never do this, not because they are targets in the conventional sense, but because the world has given them so many tools for avoiding it. Busyness is perhaps the most popular. Fill every hour, schedule every minute. Keep moving, keep producing, keep consuming, and you will never have to sit long enough with yourself to discover what you have been running from. Distraction is another. The phone in your pocket is not just a communication device. It is the most sophisticated avoidance mechanism ever built. Every time discomfort begins to rise, every time the silence starts to ask questions you are not ready to answer, there is an entire world of noise available to you at the touch of the screen. And then there is the subtlest tool of all, the story. The carefully constructed narrative about why your life is the way it is, why you are where you are, why the things that have not worked out were never really your fault, why the gap between who you are and who you wanted to be is the result of circumstances, other people, bad timing, bad luck, anything and everything except the choices you made when no one was holding a gun to your head. The Stoics were ruthless about this, not cruelly, not in the spirit of self-flagellation or shame, but with the clean, clear-eyed honesty of people who understood that self-deception is not a comfort, it is a cage. Because as long as you are telling yourself stories that protect you from the truth, you cannot change, you cannot grow. You cannot make different choices because you have convinced yourself that your choices are not the problem. And so the same patterns repeat, the same walls appear, the same ceiling holds, and you wonder why. Seneca wrote with characteristic directness, "Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power." That word, power, is important because we spend so much time trying to acquire power in the external world. Power over our circumstances, over our finances, over our careers, over the way others perceive us. And yet the most fundamental form of power, the one without which all other forms are ultimately hollow, is power over the self, over the stories you tell, over the impulses you follow, over the patterns you repeat, over the gap between what you know you should do and what you actually do when tested. That gap is where the real work lives, and closing it, even partially, even imperfectly, is the project of a lifetime. Here is something that most personal development conversations are too polite to say plainly. You already know most of what you need to know. You know that the habit is not serving you. You know that the relationship has run its course. You know that the choice you keep putting off needs to be made. You know what you are avoiding and why you are avoiding it. You know the difference between a reason and an excuse, even when you are using both interchangeably. The knowledge is not the problem. The gap between knowing and doing, that is the problem. And that gap is not closed by acquiring more information. It is not closed by reading more books or listening to more podcasts or finding the perfect framework that finally makes everything click. It is closed by one thing and one thing only: action. Small, consistent, unglamorous, often uncomfortable action taken in the direction of the person you are trying to become. The Stoics called this practice, not inspiration, not motivation. Practice, the daily, deliberate, repeated effort to align your behavior with your values. To become, through consistent action, someone whose inner life and outer life are no longer at war with each other. Someone who does not need to manage the tension between who they are in public and who they are in private, because they have closed that gap through the slow, patient work of actually living what they believe. This is harder than it sounds, because values are easy to claim and difficult to live. It is easy to say that you value honesty and much harder to be honest when honesty costs you something. It is easy to say that you value discipline and much harder to exercise it on the cold, dark morning when every part of you wants to stay in bed. It is easy to say that you value peace and much harder to choose peace when someone is doing everything in their power to provoke war. The gap between the values stated and the value lived is where character is actually forged. And it is forged not in the moments of inspiration, but in the moments of resistance. In the moments when everything in you wants to take the easy road, the familiar road, the road that requires nothing of you, and you choose differently anyway. Every time you make that harder choice, something happens inside you, something subtle but cumulative. A small deposit is made into the account of self-trust. And self-trust, built this way, through repeated evidence that you will do what you say you will do, that you will hold to what you value, even when it is inconvenient, that you are someone you can rely on, is one of the most stabilizing forces available to a human being. Because when you trust yourself, you need less reassurance from others. When you know you will handle whatever comes, you fear the future less. When you have evidence, gathered from your own history, that you can do hard things, the next hard thing loses some of its power to paralyze you. This is the inner economy of the Stoic. Every act of self-discipline is an investment. Every moment of honesty with yourself is a deposit. Every time you choose your values over your impulses, you are not just making a better decision in that moment. You are building a better version of yourself, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by unremarkable day. And what is being built, slowly and surely, is someone who is free. Free in the deepest sense, not free from responsibility or difficulty or pain. The Stoics never promised any of that. They were not selling a life without struggle. They were teaching a way to stand inside the struggle without being undone by it, to carry your burdens without becoming them, to face your circumstances without being defined by them, to live fully and genuinely inside the life you actually have rather than the life you wished you had been given, because this is the thing that the Stoics understood about happiness that most of us spend our lives missing. Happiness, real happiness, the deep and durable kind that does not depend on things going well, is not found in what you acquire or achieve or receive. It is found in who you are in relation to what you acquire and achieve and receive. It is found in the quality of your attention, your choices, your responses, your presence. It is found not outside of you, but in the practice of becoming each day a little more aligned with the best version of yourself, a little more honest, a little more patient, a little more free. Marcus Aurelius asked himself regularly, "What are you doing with the moments you have?" Not in a spirit of anxious productivity, but in a spirit of genuine reckoning. Are you living in alignment? Are you bringing your best self to the day, to the people around you, to the work in front of you? Are you wasting these hours on things that do not matter to you simply because it is easier than doing the things that do? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the right ones, and the Stoic practice is built on the willingness to keep asking them, not once in a moment of inspiration, but daily, as a discipline, as a form of respect for the life you have been given and the person you are capable of being. There is another dimension to this inner work that deserves careful attention, the relationship between your thoughts and your experience of the world. Because one of the most radical insights of Stoic philosophy, one that modern psychology has spent decades catching up to, is that your reality is not simply what happens to you. Your reality is the interpretation you place on what happens to you, the story you construct around events, the meaning you assign to circumstances, the framework through which you filter experience. And that framework is not fixed. It is not handed to you by fate or determined by your past or locked in place by your genes. It is, to a remarkable degree, something you can examine, question, and consciously reshape. This does not mean that you can think your way out of genuine suffering. It does not mean that loss is not real, or that grief should be reasoned away, or that trauma can be dissolved by simply choosing to see things differently. The Stoics were not dismissing the depth of human pain. They were pointing to something more subtle and more hopeful than that. They were saying that even in the presence of genuine suffering, even in the darkest and most difficult seasons of a human life, the mind retains some capacity to choose its orientation, not its circumstances, its orientation, the direction it faces, the story it tells itself about what this means and what it demands and what, if anything, it makes possible. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to build an entire school of psychology around his observations, arrived at the same conclusion through the most harrowing possible laboratory. He watched people in conditions of unimaginable suffering, and he noticed something that confounded easy explanation, that the people who survived, not just physically but psychologically, tended to be the ones who maintained some sense of meaning inside their suffering. Not because their suffering was less real, but because the two way they into. Not because you two, not because Montry word on who they were and what their life meant. They held, in the most desperate conditions imaginable, a small but inextinguishable flame of inner choice. And that choice, Frankl argued, is the last of the human freedoms. The freedom to choose your response to whatever life brings. The Stoics said this 2,000 years before Frankl, and they built a daily practice around protecting that freedom because they understood that it can be given away, gradually, unconsciously, through the accumulated habit of reacting instead of responding, of blaming instead of examining, of demanding that the world be different instead of choosing how you will be inside it. The freedom is always there, but it must be claimed, actively, deliberately, again and again, and claiming it begins with thought, with the discipline of noticing what you are telling yourself and asking whether that story is serving you or imprisoning you, whether the meaning you are making of your circumstances is expanding your capacity to respond wisely or contracting it into bitterness and victimhood, whether the framework you are using to understand your life is one you have consciously chosen or one you inherited and never thought to question. This is what Epictetus meant when he wrote that people are disturbed not by the things that happen to them, but by the opinions they hold about those things. The event is neutral. The suffering comes from the interpretation. Change the interpretation, not by denying the event, not by pretending it did not happen or did not matter, but by honestly examining whether the story you are telling about it is the only story available, and you change your relationship to the event. You do not make it disappear, but you strip it of its power to control you. Now, this principle must be handled carefully, because it is easy to misuse, easy to turn into a form of blame, to tell someone who is genuinely suffering that they are simply choosing to suffer, that if they just thought differently everything would be fine. That is not Stoicism. That is cruelty dressed in philosophical clothing. The Stoic insight is not that pain is optional. It is that the meaning you make of pain, the story you build around it, the identity you allow it to shape, those things involve choice. And that choice, exercised wisely and compassionately toward yourself, is where your power lives even in your most powerless moments. Think about a time when something that once devastated you, a rejection, a failure, a loss, a relationship that ended, has since become something you are grateful for. Not because the pain was not real, it was, but because the distance of time gave you a new perspective. You could see what that experience made possible that would not have been possible without it. You could see how it redirected you, how it taught you something essential about yourself, how it cleared a path you could not have seen while you were still standing in the wreckage. That reframing was not denial, it was wisdom. And the Stoic practice is, in part, the attempt to access that wisdom not only in retrospect, but in the middle of the storm itself. Not perfectly, not immediately, but with growing skill, with growing patience, with growing trust in your own capacity to find your way through. Because here is what the Stoics knew and what every person who is genuinely committed to inner work eventually discovers. The storms do not stop. That is not what this practice promises. The provocations keep coming, the losses keep arriving, the world keeps being. The world, indifferent and complicated and frequently unjust. But you change, your relationship to the storm changes. What once sent you spinning now barely moves you. What once took weeks to recover from now takes days. What once felt like the end of the world now reveals itself, sooner and sooner, as simply the next chapter. And you begin to find, to your own astonishment, that you are more capable than you knew, more resilient than you believed, more fundamentally okay than your fear ever allowed you to imagine. That discovery, made not through inspiration, but through the lived experience of actually doing the work, of failing and returning, of being pulled off center and finding your way back, that discovery is the foundation of everything. It is what makes courage possible, what makes honesty possible, what makes genuine connection possible. Because you can only truly give yourself to others when you have a self to give. You can only truly be present with someone else when you are not consumed by the management of your own unexamined interior. You can only truly love from a place of fullness, not from a place of depletion, not from the desperate transaction of needing to be loved back in order to justify your own existence. And so the inner work is not selfish. It is the opposite of selfish. It is the slow and demanding and endlessly worthwhile project of becoming someone who has something real to offer, someone whose presence is a gift rather than a demand, someone who can sit with another person's pain without needing to fix it or flee from it or make it about themselves, someone who can tell the truth even when it is uncomfortable, someone who can hold a boundary without apology and offer grace without resentment, someone who can be, in the fullest and most generous sense of that word, there. That is the person the Stoic practice is building, not a cold philosopher unmoved by human experience, not because yielded off from the messiness of the world, but a full, warm, deeply feeling human being who has learned to be the eye of the storm rather than the storm itself, who has learned that strength and tenderness are not opposites, that discipline and compassion can live in the same body, that you can be both rooted and open, both clear and kind, both firm and gentle. That is the integration the great Stoics were pointing toward, not the suppression of emotion but its mastery, not the avoidance of difficulty but the development of the capacity to meet it squarely, without drama, without collapse. Was not the exhausting performance of someone who needs the world to know how hard things are for them, just meeting it, cleanly, honestly, with the quiet confidence of someone who has done this before and knows they will find their way through again. And they did find their way through, all of them. The emperor who wrote philosophy by candlelight after governing an empire by day, the slave who built a school of wisdom out of the ruins of his captivity, the statesman who faced exile and execution with a steadiness that is echoed across 2 millennia. They were not superhuman. They were not immune to fear or grief or doubt, but they had built, through daily practice and relentless honesty, an inner life strong enough to carry them, and they left behind not just their words, but the proof that it is possible, that a human being, any human being, can choose to live this way, can choose day by day to become someone the chaos cannot claim. You are that person, not eventually, not because you have fixed everything that is broken or resolved everything that is unresolved or become some idealized version of yourself that exists only in the imagination. Now, in this moment, with everything you are carrying and everything you have not yet figured out, and everything that still hurts and everything that still frightens you, you are already the person who has the capacity to do this work, because the capacity for this kind of inner freedom is not something that has to be earned before it can be accessed. It is something that has to be accessed before it can be earned. You begin not from a place of completion, but from a place of willingness. And willingness, honest and genuine and without condition, is enough to start. The question is not whether you are ready. You will never feel ready. The question is whether you are willing to be honest with yourself even when the truth is uncomfortable, willing to sit in the silence even when the silence asks difficult questions, willing to examine your patterns even when the examination reveals things you would rather not see, willing to practice imperfectly and repeatedly the art of returning to your own center even after the world has done its very best to pull you away from it. That willingness is the seed of everything. Plant it in the soil of daily practice and something will grow, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily and surely and in ways that will eventually surprise you with their depth. Let us now move into something that the Stoics placed at the very heart of their philosophy, something that sounds simple and proves in the living of it to be among the most demanding disciplines available to a human being: the complete and honest acceptance of what is, not resignation, not passivity, not the defeated shrug of someone who has given up on influencing their circumstances, but the clear-eyed, fully conscious recognition that this moment, exactly as it is the only moment that actually exists, and that your resistance to it, your insistence that it should be different, that things should have gone another way, that people should have behaved differently, that life should have dealt you a better hand, costs you something enormous. It costs you your presence. It costs you your peace. It costs you the energy that could be going toward actual change, redirected instead into the futile and exhausting project of arguing with reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you." That is not a passive statement. It is a fierce one. It is the statement of someone who has looked at what is and decided not to waste another moment wishing it were otherwise. Because wishing it were otherwise changes nothing about what is. It only changes what you lose in the wishing. Think about how much of your mental and emotional energy goes into this, into the running argument with reality that most of us carry on inside our heads from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep. It should not have happened this way. They should not have done that. This is not fair. This is not what I planned. This is not what I deserve. These thoughts feel important. They feel like justice. They feel like they are protecting something vital in you. But look honestly at what they are actually doing. Are they changing anything? Are they bringing you closer to the life you want? Are they making you more capable of responding wisely to your actual circumstances? Or are they simply burning fuel? Fuel you need for the actual work. Oh,